Hey everybody! Welcome to Game Audio Audio Hour number 157. It's our weekly podcast. We discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to latest techniques, project experiences, audio secrets. Here you find your in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. And our newest member, Dan Reynolds. What's up?
What's happening?
Woo. How are you, man?
Yeah, I'm doing all right.
Thanks for joining the show.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
What'd you dress up as? Because I got to go to the other two. We might as well get our costumes out of the way.
Sure. Yeah, I see. I have this shirt that's waveforms, so I've dressed up as a synth enthusiast.
Or just one part of a
no one at work guessed. I don't know why. They didn't even think I was wearing the costume. It's kind of disappointing.
It's very convincing.
It is. And speaking of style, what's up, Mike Shapiro?
Not doing too badly. This is part of a Mad Hatter costume. Obviously, it's the only part of the costume that's meaningfully visible in a podcast format, and honestly, I'm too lazy to wear the rest. But the hat felt very appropriate for today on Halloween.
Halloween what? Sorry.
Halloween Eve. Halloween.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. I noticed the hat is in your favorite time signature of 10:6.
Yeah, I write everything in 10:6, and if a client objects, I just have to drop the gig because it's become my signature at this point.
It's meaningful. Or you could just like lay down the hat and just, is that a new term for like laying down the law?
Lay down the hat? I like that. Insisting on your favorite meter in a queue, even though the client threatens to fire you, we're going to call that laying down the hat.
I'm laying down the hat. And then they'll lay down the hatchet, and then we'll be out of work.
Right, and then I'll look slightly more depressed on the subsequent episode.
All right. You guys ready to guess? Let's look at Chase. Here we go. All right. I'm going with...
Well, let's hear the accent again first.
Oh, yeah.
That's the only way we know for sure.
Yeah, see if you can actually get the accent this time. See if you chaps are up to the challenge.
Huh.
I'm guessing
going
like
with
a thug from a Guy Ritchie movie, maybe?
I'm seeing 50s. I'm seeing a little Jekyll and Hyde, maybe.
I'm going with Stephen Toast from Toast of London.
You blokes are horrible at guessing what costumes are. I clearly have a grey hair here. Oscar there.
Oh, Sweeney Todd because of all the blood?
Would you like a shave, any of you?
Yeah, totally. Right. You're doing Sweeney Todd, right?
There we go.
Okay.
There was a barber and his wife, and she was beautiful. I'll stop there.
Hey.
Oh, well done.
Well done.
Yeah.
And now I need to go
just
see
do that
Sweeney
for 50
Todd.
minutes.
I have to pay for that one. Sorry.
Only if Kyle is Mrs. Lovett.
What'd you say?
Only if Kyle is Mrs. Lovett.
I've never seen Sweeney Todd. Read, seen, watched, heard.
It's one of the more, like, if you want an introduction to Stephen Sondheim, that's probably the good point of entry. And if you don't, but you have to, it's also a good point of entry because it actually has a plot, and
very nice.
Can sing some of it.
I just went for the joke. What'd you say, Chase?
It might be good music, may I add.
Oh man! Hey, chatties, let us know if our mics are okay. Always give us the thumbs up or thumbs down. If I see a thumbs down, I'll assume it's about the show, not the mic.
Well, if you don't see anything, then you can assume that they can't hear anything, right?
Yeah, that's right. I can't hear, so I won't tell. Hey guys, speaking of Sweeney Todd 19th century murderers, I watched. Wait a minute. I've got a little bit of a lead in. Are you ready?
No, but go for it.
And Mike, you may have experienced. If you go to Edinburgh, there is this thing called the Dungeons, and it's kind of like, I describe it as a dark and small Disneyland, an evil and small Disneyland, because the quality of the props and everything is pretty good. It's super small. There's one ride. Mike, have you been on it?
I haven't, but I think I've been to the London version of the same thing, if that's a franchise, because it sounds very familiar.
It is. Well, anyway, So we were there. We went to the dungeons, and one of the characters or pair of characters that they take you through that you experience in the dungeons is Burke and Hare. Burke and Hare were a couple of guys in the 1820s who murderized people and sold them to a Dr. Knox so that he could do autopsies, because Edinburgh was kind of the center of medical knowledge at the time, and they were learning more and more about what the body is made of. Apparently, they would just take dead bodies, but then they started setting rules of what kind of dead bodies you would get. So they started grave robbing, and that became an issue. So they set laws on grave robbing, and then these two enterprising fellows just decided to kill people and do it that way. So fast forward now to this weekend when I did a very horrible parenting thing, at least in my book. I saw that Burke and Hare is actually a movie on Showtime from 2011 done by the guy whose name I can't think of, but was in that funny zombie movie. Name a funny zombie movie of like a few years ago.
Army of Darkness.
Zombieland.
No, those are all good.
Shaun of the Dead.
That's it. Shaun of the Dead. Thanks, Dan. And so I was like, oh my God, family, we just did this thing. We should watch the movie and just kind of have fun with it. So my 11-year-old and my wife and I are watching the movie, and some F-bombs start dropping. And I'm like, that seems a little much for an 11-year-old. So I cover her ears and I apologize. And then we continue watching, and another F-bomb. I'm like, all right. And then a sex scene, and I'm like, hello, all right, let's cover some eyes and fumble through the remote, stopping the show at the very part of the sex scene that we're in. I'm trying to fast forward, and of course nothing works. Technology fails me, but we make it through, and we go, okay, I think all the bad stuff's out of the way. And we continue for another 10 minutes, another sex scene, and more fumbling and covering eyes, and certainly not as meaningful as the previous one. And so my wife says, did you check the rating on the movie? I was like, well, I mean, it's a comedy by Shaun of the Dead people about some, it can't be that bad.
Oh my God.
So it's rated R. Bridget saw her first rated R movie without Dad checking the rating. That was wonderful. And then Bridget says, well, I've seen everything else. We might as well finish the movie.
Well, at least it wasn't The Room.
I just think that's hilarious. She's like, all right, well, good parenting, but I do want to see the end of the movie. So let's just continue on. And I do recommend the movie, but be prepared. It's rated R, and it's hilarious. There's my anecdote. You're welcome.
Well, that was a nice segue from everybody's costume, since we do have a 19th century Londonian theme among everyone here who has a costume. Yet I feel like it's an uphill climb to get from that topic
to
game audio.
We can do it.
Can you help us with one of your famous Kyle segues?
Yes. So in Edinburgh, well-known fact, there are a lot of musicians. Some of those musicians play games. Discuss.
Well done.
You're welcome.
Well done.
They're probably
Some of those
playing
musicians,
Assassin's Creed Syndicate.
which I've heard is pretty good.
Me too.
Which one?
Assassin's Creed Syndicate.
Syndicate?
Oh, no, I heard the new one is good. Origins.
Origins, yeah, but that doesn't fit into the theme of Segway, does it?
Right. Fair enough.
Uh-oh. Chase is putting on the costume all show.
No,
all right, well, we better get started or we're going to lose our
remaining listenership, such as it is. Kyle, I heard that you've been mucking around with some of the new features in Ozone 8. Would you like to tell us what your experiences and impressions are?
Yes, I would. So Ozone 8. Well, I'm going to speak from a position of ignorance because the last time I used Ozone was 4 or 5 or something. It was a long time ago. So I may be mentioning some things that are actually have been around for a while, but they're new to me. So I got pretty excited. I think that by the way, thank you, Isotope, for sponsoring the show. We love your software very much. You know, I can actually speak more about tonal balance than I can about ozone. So let me start there. Let me start with tonal balance, which goes to neutron 2 and ozone 8. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, so you're saying that's a feature of both of those software packages?
Well, it kind of, the way I've been using it is I've been loading tonal balance into the place where I want it to be, whether that's on a track or whether it's on a master. And then from tonal balance, I can hit little buttons in tonal balance to see things from the other two. Like if I want to see the EQ from ozone 8, I can get to that via tonal balance. So it's kind of, unless I'm using it wrong, I think all you need to do is load tonal balance. You don't need to load the other two. And then you can bring up the features, the departments of what's inside those things and start affecting, you know, making changes there. Of course, you can load the other, but I don't think if you loaded like ozone on your track and also loaded tonal balance, you'd be doing, I don't know, maybe visually you'd be costing your machine a little bit much because you've got both loaded into the visual part of your software. But I found some really cool uses. And the reason I'm delaying is because I want to talk about a big thing, but I'm not going to be able to because I have to prep for it, and I'll have to do that next week. So I don't want to give anything away. But I was really impressed with in tonal balance how kind of accurately it tries to tell you what your mix should sound like. In tonal balance, it's split into bands. Like it's got low end, medium, or mids, low mids, high mids, and high, I think is what they've got. And as you play one of your songs, you'll start to see little white lines go up and down within each one of those bands. And then in the middle or somewhere near the middle of that band is like this green area, which what they're saying with this like green area is your song, when you play it back, that white line should try to stay within this green area. Pardon me. And if you play it and you get to the end or whatever, however much you're listening to, and that white line isn't there, it's telling you like if it's above, you've got too much of this. If it's below, you've got too little of it. And I was mixing a record for a friend, and he gave me the board mix, and he was like, "I think the mix sounds pretty good." And I said, "Well, it does sound pretty good. The high end is a little bit there, and the low end is a little bit too much. Sounds like it needs to be tightened up." And he was like, "Well, I'm not hearing that." And I went to tonal balance, and it was showing the lines. The high end was outside of this threshold, and the low end was outside of the threshold. And visually, it was easier for me to talk to him about, you know, like, I'm going to make these changes to your low end, which I don't think he was all that excited about until he saw this kind of measurement tool saying that his low end was a little bit strong. And so that's really effective. Like if you're making some mixes for somebody and you want to describe to them the changes you're going to make. If you want to visually do that, tonal balance was really cool for that. Did I explain that well? Does that make sense to you guys?
Sure.
Yeah,
so I think like a range of levels, kind of a broad sweeps, kind of what am I saying, EQ breakdown of like a 3-band EQ breakdown of your tune that's getting updated in real time. Is that right? It's not like chugging through your song and then giving you an average. It's actually giving you a moving window, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's important, I found, to take those measurements both at a chorus and a verse rather than just the whole song. Because like, for instance, this particular song had too much high end, but it was only while the person was playing the hi-hat. And so they weren't playing the hi-hat during the chorus. And so the chorus, the high end kind of fell within the threshold or in the range, but then during the verse, it was out. And instead of just like making an EQ change, I listened for the instrument that was dominant during that section and realized that really what would be more effective is actually to change the hi-hat and to either EQ the hi-hat or, you know, use some drum software and replace the hi-hat completely, which is what I ended up doing.
So you're saying it's useful if you want to show a client a change you want to make, and you might not be able to say, "Hey, listen to the high mids. Don't they sound a little harsh to you? I want to pull something back." The client may be, "I kind of like it." And you can say, "Well, look at this little graph. Here's a recommended range for the high mids. Here's a little thing showing where we are. Note that we're above the recommended range." You're saying it's a kind of communication tool in that respect.
Yeah, it was really powerful that way. And, you know, like they have 3 different options for how these bands are going to lay out for you. Like they have I think they have orchestral as one of the options. I think they have modern as another option, and that changes the ranges. Like in modern, there's more bass than there is in orchestral. And So if you're shooting for an orchestral sound in your mix, choose orchestral from their list of 3. It'll change those bands and then try to target those areas. And of course, it's just a getting started tool. This isn't the end. You got to just get started. But use it as a hint too. You know, like you may find in your orchestral that the bass is really strong, and you may go, okay, let me change to a different mic. Let me get off the stage mic some, you know, and blend in a little bit more of the room mics or something, and kind of bring that bass down a little bit.
How did they build their profile? Like, where's that coming from, that data?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It comes from the Wizards of Isotope and their infinite amazingness. But that's a great question, because you have to say, hey, maybe I don't like this, or maybe I don't want to target that, or maybe I don't think that's true. What's great about it is you can create your own targets.
Right.
You can go in and load in a song that you love. It'll create this target for you, and you save it as a preset. And then from then on out, you can say, okay, I want to sound like Black Dog from Led Zeppelin. And here's what that looks like in a general 4-band kind of view.
Are the bands fixed, or can you move them around?
I didn't try to move them. That's a good question. I feel like they're movable for some reason, but I was messing with a lot of software and maybe something else was movable. But with that, you go into Ozone, you have even deeper controls in that regard. And, you know, presets scare me. I've been very open about that. And somewhat, I feel like presets kind of dumb us down as audio engineers. Like if we do a preset and we love the way it sounds and we move forward, then we don't really know what made it sound that way, I fear. And also, we're not challenging ourselves to come up with something that's interesting on our own, rather than just depending upon presets. But there is something to be said for creating your own presets from stuff that you like, you know, because I A/B, and you brought this up in the chat, Mike. I use Magic A/B all the time to go back and forth between stuff I'm targeting and what I'm working on. And you have to depend upon your ear, and you have to, you know, and one of the things that bothers me the most about that is Magic A/B kind of gives me the idea that I want this whole song to sound like that whole song. But things change depending upon the energy of the verse and the chorus, and you know, background singers compared to foreground, the singer, and all those adjustments kind of get lost when you're just flipping between 2 songs. But when you're using a software like Ozone, you can actually get in there. You can ozone on the vocal track. You can ozone, you know, like some just the sound effects or something, and you want to feel like, why does that gun sound so wide or something? And you can figure that out with Ozone. You can target those things. And really kind of save a preset and go, oh, they you know, they got an exciter on it, and then maybe they widened it a little bit or something. And that was really powerful too. Do you ever use it like that, Mike?
You mean Ozone as the presets within Ozone?
Well, creating your own presets, because you can bring in audio into Ozone and do the same thing, like I was just talking about.
What's the name of the plugin we're discussing? The feature, the visual, the thing we were just talking about.
The tonal balance.
Tonal balance, yeah. I did try loading in a film music cue, because I wasn't sure where their orchestral template was coming from. You know, I didn't quite know what that means, since the orchestra has so many. It can sound like so many different things depending on context and the style of the piece. So it's really weird to think like, okay, I want this to sound like an abstract idea of an orchestral piece. So I loaded in a couple of film music references, and I found it interesting. I found it was useful when I was way off target. Like if my high end was way high or way low, this gave me an indicator that there's something I should pay attention to. And it didn't give me enough information to let me know exactly what I needed to change, but it was a handy red flag.
Yeah, I've got to say, I was pretty impressed with the tool. The exciter on Ozone is a little too exciting for me. And I struggle with this all the time, though. It's like, just touch it a little bit, and it seems like, like, did anybody ever use the Aphex? What do Aphex call their exciter?
The oral exciter.
Oral exciter. Yeah, did you ever use that?
I only read about it in history books.
Thanks, buddy. Exciters, and BBE has one too that kind of frightened me a little bit. But the thing that happens with me, and I wonder if this happens with you guys, is when I'm working on stuff, whether I'm writing, especially if I'm writing music, I do this all the time. And I don't know if we even talked, I think we kind of touched on it last show for some reason. Do you ever get like, oh, I got to calm down a little bit? You know, like you start writing something, you're like, oh, that's a little bombastic. That's a little, you know, and then you give it to a client and they go, boy, this thing lacks a lot of energy. That happens to me a lot. I naturally kind of want to move at 80 beats per minute. Very mellow. Nobody get excited. Nobody move, you know? And then they'll say, give me a cue that sounds this big thing. And I'll go, okay. And I can do big, and I do big. And then I go, okay, hold on. That's a little big. You ever do that?
No.
I mean, you're talking artistically rather than mix wise.
Yeah. Well, for me, it happens. And I imagine with you guys too, it happens all the time. Like if I'm in a writing mode, I try to chill myself. Control yourself, Kyle. Settle down. And then I'll go to mix, and I'll bump something up, and I'll go, whoa, easy, easy. Don't you do the same?
I find that my two foibles are always leaving something in reserve energy-wise when I shouldn't, because this is game music, and everything, you know, is typically should be really exciting all the time. And I'm still shaking some film sensibilities when I do game music, so I often find that I have to go back and overdo things. And then I find that that's actually what I thought was overdoing it is just barely reaching the energy level the client wants.
That's what I'm talking about.
My other foible is I sometimes over orchestrate, or my accompaniment textures sometimes are thicker than they need to be. And this is sometimes I feel like, well, let me just add a counterline here. Let me double that at the unison. You know, it's kind of like a hyperactive orchestration mentality.
Yeah.
And sometimes I have to pull back in terms of density of accompaniment so that I'm not overwhelming the moment with activity. So those are my two bad habits. This might not be a bad topic for today.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm thinking. Dan, you want to dig in? Chase has no bad habits.
I think, yeah, I like to hold back. Mostly, I feel like it's because with games in particular, you're building an experience, and the experience isn't apparent until you're actually doing like a playthrough. And so I feel like you don't really know how far you can push it, and I tend to err on leaving myself headroom to push further. Also, I think also for energy sake, like just in my own output, because I could just like zip off in some tangent and just start generating all this material and then come back and go, oh crap, that's totally, I went left field with that, and that's not appropriate. And then I have to like redo a bunch of stuff. And I'd rather sort of build it up and see how it's turning out in the game as I go. So that's my feeling with that. As far as the exciter situation, I think the concern that with excitement in that is to say, like harmonic exciters and processors that sort of add harmonic distortion. The concern I feel is that your tonality, like if you're like whatever key you're in, if you're adding a bunch of odd ordered harmonics, maybe on independent instruments, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's starting to warm up, or that's starting to sound nice and fat. And then you realize in the full mix scenario that you just have so much of that going on. It doesn't take much on each individual one to like create this sort of additive harmonic boosting that results in like not so great output.
Said brilliantly. I don't think a lot of people realize that an exciter is just adding distortion on harmonics on, what is it, third and fifth order? It depends on the one, right? Or second.
Yeah, it depends on the algorithm or whatever one you're using. There's actually an insane mic pre that you can get. I forget the company, but they actually have an even and odd harmonic booster on the mic pre. So on input, if you're feeling bold, you can be like, oh yeah, let's just boost the harmonics there.
Isn't that black box audio?
I would have to look it up.
Well, Black Box does make a harmonic distortion unit, a software one, as well. I don't know if they make the hardware box, but they definitely make the plugin in conjunction with Plugin Alliance. And I use that when I'm doing something Aphex Aural Exciter-like. I usually turn to that box.
Yeah.
Well, I turn to my plugin simulation of that box that has a nice little photo of the front panel, so I can pretend that I have hardware. But I love that thing. I get a lot of mileage out of it. With used judiciously, it does add a lot to a mix.
Yep, I agree. Well, exciters, I started as exciter, and Chase, I'm coming to you, so you better get your accent ready. I started with exciters, but then I reminded myself of something I've always wanted to talk about on the show is like when music gets exciting, having nothing to do with exciters, I tend to chill myself out. Now, so sorry for the confusion there, everybody. So Chase, question to you is,
Yes, mate.
2 foibles about your writing or mixing, however you want them to be, and how often do you use a piece of exciter hardware or software?
It's actually quite interesting. I don't have that problem about making too big of a music, like too big of a sound. Actually, my music's quite complex if you think about it. And it's more of a problem of it being too minimalistic in the sense of it just depends on like what project I'm on. But usually I have more than enough and I have to cut back. And at the same time, like I forget to like maybe modulate to do something else to just keep it quite interesting, of less boring or monotonous for that matter. And I love exciters, regardless of what you guys say. You guys are a bunch of blokes, and I don't care. Y'all need a shave, and good night. I'm just kidding. Exciters, like you said, are, I think they're like EQs. Only use them when you absolutely need them in the right places, depending on what type of music you're writing. And for me, like I have to be careful because I actually do like that sound of that harmonic distortion. And if I know that I like it, I need to cut back, and I don't need to use it all the time. And so, interesting enough, Kyle, you actually taught me something about when you were doing the masters of a certain project earlier in the year, of where that balance is and where the distortion actually fits within the mix, and so on and so forth. So kudos to you for teaching me those tips.
I think that's a good point, actually, about your particular material. I think there are certain types of musical genres or styles that lend themselves to more or less sound design elements, or like pushing beyond the feel of the original source sound, whatever it may be, more or less distortion. Dave Hill designs Europa 1 as a mic pre, lets you dial in on input even or odd harmonics.
Nice.
Also slew rate if you're like just want to get really nitty gritty.
Wow.
Who is that brave?
I know, right?
It reminds me of the stories about Bernard Herrmann composing, and they'd say he would just use a pen and write it on the orchestration paper, go straight to the orchestration from the beginning to the end, and he just, I guess, wouldn't make mistakes. And that feels like that's adding harmonics, like an exciter on your input is the equivalent of that. You know, you're so confident in the sound you want that you're willing to not go back or even use a plugin which would allow you to hedge the decision till later.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting too, actually. Like, where do you feel that, like, is it confidence or is it commitment? Right. Because like sometimes it's just a matter of saying, this is this, like guitar tone is a big part of that, right? That's ever since digital or even just any DI like side input, it's just like choosing, like committing to guitar tone. That's kind of, it's bold in a sense, but it's also like, it turns out usually for the better, I think, because you've made a commitment toward the production. You're saying, this is what the song is going to sound like when you're making it.
Dan, you stole the words out of my mouth. That's exactly where I was going to go. When it comes to guitar tone, you want those odd and even harmonics to start playing a role. I mean, that's what amplification's all about. When people say the tone of their amplifier, all it is trying to figure out how much of this harmonic material is going to be brought out through the speaker. There's entire tube sets of for your amplifier, whether you're going to go with 12 AX7s or whatever, because you're trying to get those harmonics out of it. So I have a feeling that these mic pre's are made for putting in front. You know, they're saying, okay, you're going to put a mic in front of a guitar cabinet, and you want to get as much out of that as possible. So here's your options. Yeah, it gets me excited, if you will.
Aren't you quite
to have that kind of mic pre capability? I don't want to do that in post because I do want to actually commit the sound. You know, and this goes back to a lot of times when people are recording. You know, with orchestras, I was going to say something that might be really stupid, but I'll go ahead because that's never stopped me before. But you know, with bands, it seems that rehearsals are less and less, if in some ways, and sometimes non-existent. You know, write a song with some acoustic instruments on a tour bus, and then go into the studio with electric instruments, and everybody lays down their separate parts, and then the mix engineer gets 100 tracks and has to make a song out of it. It's kind of a common approach these days. But yet, if you played together and wrote this song, you would dial in that tone. You would say, oh, wait a minute, that tone sounds terrible here. Let's figure that out right now. But when everybody's recording at different times, that comes later. If anybody even makes a comment at all, except the mix engineer in the end.
And I think
so with orchestras, you know, I mean, when you, Mike, Dan, Chase, all of you, when you guys work with a live quartet or something, I mean, they go through rehearsals, right? Or do you just show them the music straight up, put in some very flat mic pre's and microphones so that you can just capture everything and then change it all later?
Well, if you're recording a string quartet, the musicians have a pretty good idea of what the sound is. There's not typically a lot of timbral variety in string instruments, unless you're doing something very deliberately affecting in process. You know, if you're doing something wild, then that's another story. But it's not like a guitar where you're reinventing the instrument every time you record, or you're picking something from a sea of possibilities. So whereas a guitarist, I think, really needs to hear the sound that you're recording, and that's to your point of making your decisions, of your timbral decisions up front. It's useful to them because they will adjust their playing based on what their guitar sounds like. But with strings, there's much less variety in that sense. So I think it may make sense to postpone as many decisions as you can, in as much as you have decisions to make about tone color, till later.
Gotcha. Hence my use of Earthworks mic pre's, because I love how flat they are. But I don't want that on a guitar cabinet unless I already like the sound of the guitar.
Kyle, what do you think about this technique, which people like myself who are not super intelligent about making guitar decisions sometimes use, which is that let the guitarist pick up some settings and send a colored signal, and at the same time track a clean signal as well. So you've got the tone they were listening to, which informed their artistic choices, but you've also got a relatively neutral tone that you can play with and see post facto if you do something else. Yeah.
I mean, that's a great idea and commonly done, because even if you want to like double the guitar, you've got the part right there. You can just reamp it through some other amplifier or make changes later. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fantastic idea. And it's also a secret for capturing really, really good bass. A lot of bassists just get DI'd into the mix. But I know of a couple of guys, and I certainly like the practice of amping or miking an amp anyway, and then DIing as well. And then you get a nice
double sound.
You get to mix the bass in there a little bit, make it sound a little bit more lively.
I'm going to take an opposing view on Mike's perspective because it's more interesting then. But I will assert that if you hold off on we'll call guitar tone a sound design element, right? If you hold off on the sound design portion of your production and compositional process, you're actually preventing the design from informing your compositional process.
If you choose one or the other, right? If you went with direct guitar instead of amped guitar.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you pick both, then you've...
That's my answer. Pick them both. More guitar. That's my answer. Always.
But I'm just saying, like, choosing a guitar tone can inform the if we go back to the band scenario, right? Let's say you have a group of musicians. Someone picking a guitar tone, even just messing around with a thing and then playing, like, that can come up with interesting compositional ideas, motives that work specifically because that tone creates this sound, like this sort of musical effect or whatever, and then that can inform compositional process.
Well, absolutely. That's I think that's why there's an argument for having a set of choices for your guitarist, or if you've got another instrument where the world is your oyster in terms of your tone color palette. But we were also arguing alongside that firm, bold, artistically well-defined decision, you also hedge, and then you run a separate input with a very clean sound. And that way, if later on you get some other inspiration, you know, you've got something extra to play with. So I think that there's something to be said for the best of both world approach.
There is something, though. So if I had to choose between, hey, Kyle, you're going to play guitar during this whole song. That song is going to have different guitar sensibilities. So you're going to play different in the verse than you're going to play in the chorus. On top of that, we're going to layer guitars on top of each other, which is just lovely. Forget about it. I'll do that all day. When I start layering, I actually am less interested in a clean tone and more specifically interested in a guitar tone that's coming out of an amplifier or some effects, kind of what Dan's going to. And the reason is because, like, say you've got a song where you're layering, and I know we're talking kind of in the vein of recording music for radio instead of games, but this applies anytime you're going to use an instrument and you're going to layer that instrument. You can't have the same guitar tone. That you would just be doubling its loudness. So you got to change the tone. And then when you change the tone of that second layer, the way I play is affected by the sound that's coming out of the amplifier. Like, say all of a sudden I've got this like rock and roll sound, but then I want to add a disco kind of funk sound on top of it from like Nile Rodgers or something. I don't want to just play cleanly and then have that recorded, then later go in and add a funk kind of amplifier sound to it, because when I play, I'm playing based off of the way the amplifier or the chain of effects are responding. And so if I just play blankly and then we just plump in some effects later, the compression may be wrong, the hits might be missing their attack, you know, the tail might be lasting, it's too short or something, and I'm coming back in before, or the tail's too long and I'm cutting it off by starting again with another riff. You know, so it's like there's something to be said for the main line having a sound and then also recording a dry guitar so that something can be added later, or it can be fuddled with if you don't like the main line. But when layering starts to happen, I can't think of a time that I want to record that dry. I actually want to record that with some sound. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think we all more or less agree on the core here, that sound informs performance, and as Dan said, it also informs composition. And that's especially true when performance and composition are interleaved, and you may be coming up with ideas because you are the player or you're listening to the player, and you're doing kind of a Thomas Newman-y thing where you've got a bunch of guys and you're sort of improvising the composition. And there may also be value to the quiet hedging of the clean tone as well, though I think ideally that's not your primary recorded product.
You summed it up.
I'll even
What's next?
I'll play devil's advocate, and I'll add one interesting little twist to this topic. And I'll say, well, can we think of a disadvantage to having that extra little clean tone that you've got in the back pocket to play with later or to redefine later? And I'll argue that there might be a disadvantage to even having that option. And I'm kind of improvising this a little bit, but it can perhaps cause creative paralysis in that you suddenly have too many options. You can go down the rabbit hole of amp simulators and guitar effect simulators and spend a lot of mental energy constructing or even experimenting And there is something fun about saying, well, that's the guitar we recorded and that's all we've got, and I've just got to deal with it. Avoiding the abyss of freedom problem. And it can also be useful in terms of the client, because if you tell the client, that's the guitar we paid for, so we should use it, it might bypass a whole negotiation where the client's like, well, can I have 4 versions? And then I'll pick the one I like the best, kind of a standard operating procedure sort of thing. They may not even know that they want anything different, but they just might like to see a menu of choices. So there are some counter arguments in certain situations where you're trying to narrow the search tree for your sound. You're trying to hit a deadline, or you just want to simplify the decision processes.
Yeah. And it's another track a mixing engineer has to deal with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think you get that problem, especially with like producers who are not engineers, who are like, let's try it with this. And they're just sitting in the booth like behind you, and you're just like, okay, we'll try it with that.
Hey, did I ever tell you the story of my producer couch? Okay, I have. Never mind. I'll shut up.
I like using amplifiers for voice manipulation. It's actually quite fun.
Ooh, yeah.
Is that where your accent is coming through? Do you have like an amp? Like a British amp?
It's the Vox amp.
I won't be responsible for that joke, so it's okay with me.
Hey, guys, so I got another one for you. Let's talk dialogue. So I worked on a piece here today where the person speaking, a female person, was, I thought, very, I call it a whistle tone. Like you've heard people that talk and they've got a whistle. And sometimes the S is so strong and the whistle is so strong, it's kind of piercing.
Absolutely.
So number one thing I wanted to mention about this was I thought it was the person, and then a male character spoke and had it also, and I realized it's the microphone. They kept using the same microphone. And what I found out they used was one of those Zoom recorders. So sorry, Zoom, got to throw you under the bus there for a minute. So be careful when you're using a Zoom recorder. They seem to pick up sibilants really strongly, especially whistle bands. That was part one. Part two is do you guys ever do this? I do this a lot, is stack a bunch, or not a bunch, a couple of the same type of plugin. Like I had a de-esser and then another de-esser, then an EQ and another EQ, so that I could try to comb down the whistling, also deal with the S's, and also make it sound natural without hurting the voice. Do you guys ever do that? You ever double up on stuff?
Only if it's necessary. Like if I have like a audio file that's really troublesome of some sort, like then I would have to do all of that surgical work. But at that point, like I would just scrap it, like unless it's the only thing I have and I need it.
Yeah, I had to use it.
I try not to use them in a row. Like I think there's a lot of I like to EQ before and after compression, because compression acts on specific bands, and if I can control what the compressor is acting on before it acts, then that's great. I can do that. Usually carving out non-audible frequencies first. But yeah, I try not, especially EQs. I think EQs, because they are, every time you add a band, it's basically the same as having a bunch of EQs. Like unless you've got, a limited band EQ, I don't know. I don't need it. I use FabFilter, so I can have as many as I want.
Killer EQ. And that's actually in my chain. I did that, and I did the EQ7 from Pro Tools. Try to specifically chill things out. Michael Hoffman said in the chat room that he doubles up on occasion, but just gentle adjustments on each instance. And that is the trick of it, because I think a lot of times the point I'm getting at is, at least for me, a lot of the time I will be lazy and I'll go, here's the EQ I'm using, and I'm going to just use it. And big swaths and I'm big changes. And then you go, that doesn't sound that great. And then you make subtle changes and you go, that still doesn't sound that great. And then you go, okay, well, this EQ is better on the high end than the low end, so I'm just going to do high end stuff with it. One of my favorite de-essers that's kind of like that is by mech DSP, and it's called SA something. They don't even tell you what the bands are. They've got like 5 bands. They won't tell you what the frequencies are. Right, left or right, it's low end to high end. For some reason, it magically works. I like that one. But I don't use the whole thing. I just use like a band of it. And then I go, well, that other band, I don't know where that's set, and I can widen the Q a little bit, but I don't really want to mess with that. It doesn't sound exactly right. So let me just turn it off. Let me not use it. Although the temptation is to leave that band on. Let's turn that band off, turn this one band on, go to another de-esser, and then start sculpting some more from there. I do that a lot. And another thing that I find, I hope this is a good tip for people, is de-reverb on de-essing. Because a lot of times people will de-ess and they'll say it's not quite right. And what I find I'm hearing is that the S is still hanging in the room after the spoken word is over. And I use de-reverbers to try to gate that and try to get that room to that reverb in the room to go away. I find that SPL by that you can get from Plugin Alliance, the SPL Deverb, I think it's called. Yeah, it's rather inexpensive. It's really good with high end de-reverbing. It's not very good with low end. The problem with de-reverbers though is you have to time that gate, because basically a de-reverber is trying to cut the tail off of something. It's trying to hear a person talk, cut the tail, and get rid of it. And if a person's speaking very fast with short words like this, and you set it to that, and then later they go, so, and then they stop, it doesn't seem to, you set a threshold. They can tell when somebody's talking and not talking, but it just doesn't seem to get that gate right. No de-reverb. I've tried Unveil. I've tried so many de-reverbers. There's a bunch out there. None of them get that perfectly right. But I find that most reverb that bugs me is in the high end. And usually SPL Deverb is the best, is my favorite one. I'll put it that way. My favorite one for getting rid of it. I hope that's helpful.
Is there a word that's as hard to say as de-reverber?
Yeah. According to my wife, it's I love you, Kyle. That's just as tough. That's pretty funny right there. Do you see how I did that when I flipped that around and made it? Never mind.
He's staying in costume this entire time.
That's it. Grumpy middle-aged husband, father. That's what I dressed up as. Let me flip my collar here, make it look hip.
Now it's interesting. We were talking about serial compression, and FMR makes a little hardware unit called Really Nice Compressor, and it's
Shapiro has.
It's actually does he?
No, they have a really nice preamp.
Oh, you have the really nice preamp.
Yeah.
Well, the really nice compressor has a really nice mode, and the really nice mode actually takes whatever your amount is, whatever you set the ratio as, divides it by 3, and then passes it through 3 times, and what you end up with is a much smoother compression.
Oh wow!
Yeah. Something about
really
gentle
nice
passes.
RNC.
Yeah.
That's rad, dude. I haven't heard of that.
So you're saying as if, let's say you did a 9-to-1 ratio.
I think it does 3-to-1 passes. Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder if any software plugin has analogous functionality.
I have noticed when I do denoising with RX, I will usually err on multiple very gentle passes because I find the artifacting is minimized that way.
Gosh, I'm about to say something. I don't know. I'm an audio dude. We're opinionated, but this is one of those places where I just swore against something and found out it's fantastic. And I say it because of what you said, Dan. I found that with the denoise, I had to do multiple passes, and it works. RX denoise works great, but I'll be damned if there's another one that they use in TV and film all the time. Oh my goodness, why can't I think of it right now?
Oh, the Cedar box or whatever it is.
Cedar. Yeah. Damn it, Cedar. What is going on? It's a bunch of like witches over there.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And if you go and oh my God, there's so many things about Cedar I want to hate. I really honestly do. But it's so good. I hate that it's so good because they're like ignoring things that bother me. Like my interface looks kind of like Windows 98, you know, like, oh, that's such a stupid thing to get bothered by. Or like the interface, like the, you know, how to work so I had the good fortune of hanging out with a couple of Cedar guys, and they showed us how to use the equipment, which I won't explain here. It's another topic. Or use the software, not hardware. And the way they were using it, I was like, oh, of course. I was using it all wrong. So there went part of it. And once I started using it correctly, I was like, oh, this is fantastic. But if you get their, what's it called? DS1 or something? DNS1?
Like yeah.
And another thing, they're a fortune. It costs a fortune.
Yeah.
You got to sell your house to get one of these plugins.
Yep.
But they know what the hell they're doing. And they're so expensive because they're just ubiquitous in the TV and film industry, where apparently money rolls more freely than the game industry, and not as many indies, I guess. But so it's really expensive, looks okay, but works so well, man. Yeah. Oh, the DNS1 drives me crazy. So what I like to do for dialogue is I'll put the DNS1 in. They have on the far left, they have a button. It's like learn mode. Basically, it's learn mode, but you leave it in learn mode and then you process your audio, and it watches the whole time. You just see all the faders just going up and down. And then when you listen back, you're like, oh, yep, that sounds pretty damn good. Nah, they're good.
You know, it's expensive when there are no prices on the website and you can download a brochure.
Well, they started as a hardware unit, didn't they?
They have a hardware unit that they do right now for live television that denoises stuff.
Yeah, I think that's how they started out.
Oh, like did they? Did they?
Yeah,
I see.
I think they started out. I think that's why they were so ubiquitous in television production.
Oh my God, they're like the Avid of plugins.
That's a pretty low blow.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
That's mean.
Except that they do their job right?
They do. Yeah. Yeah, they didn't do like Cedar 12 where they told you all these new features that they never release, or they release really slowly. That cracked me up. I got to go, I don't care. What's Avid going to do? Come to my house? And please do, because I got a lot of things to talk to you about.
They're going to follow you on Twitter.
Hey, as long as they try to do better, I'm all for them. We got to be better tomorrow than we were today. But when they released 12 and they were like, and all of these features, and then all of them were like delayed or changed, they changed their mind about releasing them. There was a point at which I had 12 and I was like, hey, wait a minute, I just paid more and I've still got 11.
Yeah, I think I recently saw one of their latest updates. It was like 12.8 or something, and they had announced that you could now make music with MIDI.
Yeah, they had a bunch of, I've got it. They got a bunch of MIDI
Good to know.
Oh my God, dudes. Speculation, rumor, Ableton 10.
Still
what do you guys think? Is it a real thing? Is it going to happen?
Wasn't it just announced?
Was it officially announced?
Hold on, let me go to...
Or was it rumorly announced?
I'm going to look at KVR, because I could swear that they...
If you go to ableton.com, does it say, here comes 10?
That's a pretty logical suggestion, isn't it?
You can't trust KVR. Come on.
Well, I mean, they just...
I want to know.
Press releases, but...
I trust them with my life.
Oh my God. Chase, nobody got blood on your
sleeve. You live life on the edge, man.
Well, you come from where I am. You live life too.
It's like Moby Games. I've done more games that I have never done in Moby Games than the games that I haven't done that I have done that they didn't credit me with. It's unbelievable.
I will say that if you're ever self-conscious about your web design skills, head on over to ableton.com. Yeah. This will be a huge boost to your self-confidence.
Ableton, not a sponsor, but hopefully soon will be, because I love you. There's no doubt about that. The whole everybody here in the chat room and all will tell you how much Kyle loves Ableton. Please, Ableton. Mike did not mean that.
No, I was kidding. It's beautiful. That's definitely one of the better WordPress templates that are free. So yes.
WordPress. Oh my God.
I got nothing against Ableton. I don't really use their products. I do have something against Avid, but Ableton's fine.
So did it say 10 coming from Ableton?
No, nothing there. So nothing that I saw.
So rumors abound. What do we think? Who's excited? Apparently me. Nobody else.
Yeah, you're alone there, chat.
Well,
Hey, I'll tell you.
Ableton bought cycling, whatever, right? 70 something.
Yeah, a while ago, right?
Yeah.
A year maybe. I love both of those things. But hey, you know what? This reminds me, Dan.
Oh, what's up, man?
Have I ever told these people how I met you, Dan, and what you did for me in my career, Dan? Because I know I've said it and I've thanked you, but I think I owe you a thanks every time I see your face.
Really? I don't know.
Heck yeah.
I don't remember what I did.
Well, back in 2000 something, very early days, I was a big time Cubase user and Ableton, by the way. And I was trying to get heavy into composition for games, and the only person that I got, well, this is all coming out wrong as I say it because I only asked one person. So the one person that I asked was so generous with his time in the gang forums, and that was Dan. And I would say, what? And he would go this, and I'd go, how? And he'd go that. And then I finally said, do you have a template? And he's like, here's a template. I mean, endlessly. You really honestly, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart because I don't want to be like sycophantic. You literally continued to give me information that kept me on that line of hope of like, I think I can do this. You know what I mean? And I have a question. Never ever treated me like I was a burden. And I don't think I've thanked you enough. That's why I'm doing it yet another time.
No problem, man. I mean, it's rising tides, right?
That's true. Rising tides lift all ships. I mean, thank God for those templates you sent me, and I would just go, oh.
Were those were East-West?
Yeah.
Contact templates or something like that, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, literally, I learned how to do the contact dance due to you, 100%. Like, how do I? I just load everything in Contact and point to it. I see how that works.
It's funny. We were just talking about in the Game Audio Slack about how. We were just talking about the whole evolution of like Gigasampler and Contact, and I had this really weird thing where I was, because like I think in 2006 is when I started setting up my rig and like trying to like, I'm going to be a music person, and I had decided to go with Contact over Gigasampler because symphonic choirs was better, in my opinion, than Voices of the Apocalypse. I don't know if you guys remember.
Oh, there's some fighting words.
Oh yeah,
Voices of the Apocalypse. But I was like, based on these two products, and then ironically, Symphonic Choirs was like the library I used absolutely the least.
Showed you there, didn't it?
Yeah. It did. But it was lucky. Like, saved. I dodged a bullet because shortly thereafter, Gigasampler took a dive.
Yeah. I was going to say, good news, had you had a Gigabox and loaded up all the samples you needed there, you would have also used that very little.
I would argue that during the heyday of Giga Studio, I mean, it started as Gigasampler, became Giga Studio, and Contact was up to like version 2.
Yeah.
It was kind of choose your poison. Both platforms were really these nascent, cutting edge, but also bleeding edge ways of producing audio. And I know Contact 2 was notorious for bugs and memory leaks and problems. And Giga Studio had its own pool of tiers to contend with. Obviously,
each tier
Contact,
in each computer.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. We were just talking about how back then you would have multiple computers because your computer only gave you a maximum of 4 gigs of RAM, and unless you hacked the program header file, you could only get 2 gigs of RAM allocated to the program.
Yeah, and don't run that on an E-machine. You guys are lucky to have 4 gigs back then.
There's a nightmare I haven't had in a while.
I'm lucky to see Contact boots up.
Was that the one that was or am I thinking of freepc.com?
E-machines were like 4 times cheaper than any other computer.
Do you have a gateway right next to it? It's like 4 gateways.
Well, that's
one
why,
E-machine.
Believe it or not, I upgraded from the gateway. What do you know, right? I'm the smart one.
Didn't Dell put the nail in? Anyway, so many things have been said here. I want to say, Harry Gregson Williams. I was watching an interview with him, And he was talking about, and by the way, I'm going to go to where I saw this interview, because if you guys don't know about these, you got to check these out. I've been watching them endlessly for a couple of weeks. Harry Gregson Williams was talking about when he worked at Remote Control. He was like Hans' number 2 guy, or number 1 guy, I guess, because Hans is number 1, number 0. I don't know. Anyway, he was the next guy. And apparently he comes from a very talented family, and he came to the States, and Hans, he got a job with Hans, and Hans said, here's what I use. And it was apparently like a bunch of S70s. Isn't that what they are, Mike? The Roland sampler?
760s. Yeah.
760s. Yeah. And Hans had said to him, I think, now here's where I don't know for sure, but I think he had loaded up like gigasample into these samplers, or not the software, but the samples or something. I don't know. Anyway, it's confusing. I'm probably screwing that up very badly, but that's not the point of the story. But apparently Hans said, you just need a stack of these to work with me. And like each one of those was like $2,000. And he had, like, Harry Gregson Williams had like $1,500 to his name. And so Hans took him over to like a bank and co-signed a loan for him.
Wow.
And said, here you go, buy them all. So he bought them all. But I'm pretty sure somehow Gigasample tied into that, because he was talking about how he had all of these computers for Gigasample, and that all of that is not needed at all anymore. And it's a really funny story about how he got started, and how Hans is just like, he's been successful by then. He could afford to buy all this stuff in triplicate. By the way, those videos are on the website for what's the name of, oh my gosh,
Designing Sound.
Orchestral Library Manufacturers, Spitfire. If you go to Spitfire's website, there's just so many videos of like the history of all these composers and stuff. It's like sit down talks. One of my favorite ones is Grumpy Composers. It's like 3 of them at dinner. That's really fun to watch. It's long though. I mean, I even watched 3 hours of the actual orchestral recording of this television show, Tutankhamun. Which was really fun to watch, but it's 3 hours. So just turn on the background, and it's really informative. Even if you've never been to one of those sessions, which I have never been to a big session like that, it was just really cool to see how it all flows. And none of them had seen the music. It's just all these London players that just like see the music, start playing. It's amazing. Anyway, check those out. Those are amazing. He's got one of my favorite is Ann Dudley, who used to be in
Art of Noise.
Mike, what'd you say?
Art of Noise.
Art of Noise. I was going to say Mike will know this. So check those interviews out. They're really quite insightful and pretty amazing. And the Harry Gregson Williams one is pretty hilarious about what it was like to work with Hans Zimmer, who seems like the nicest guy in the world. Hey, who else thought within, I literally said it out loud when I watched Blade Runner 2049. Within 2 seconds of the movie starting, you hear a vroom, and I turned to the guy beside me. I go, well, Hans is here. Is that a little too soon? Come on, Hans. Come on over. We'll talk about it. I'll get you a drink.
So was Vangelis not available?
Yeah, right. That's a great question. Who would you like to do the score? Well, I think we touched on it in a previous episode, and maybe we've said this. So I don't want to repeat myself, but I can't remember because the show and conversations all kind of blend together.
Get it together.
But I thought the soundtrack was actually pretty good. There was a lot of CS80, and it did beg the question, why didn't they just ask Vangelis?
Because they're being cheap.
Oh,
I don't think Zimmer's cheaper, man.
That's a good call. That's a good call.
That's the joke,
like
right?
people in the world that have CS80s. So right there, you've budgeted yourself out of a.
I got a CS80 at my old school. I mean, it's just hanging out. I mean, I could have did the soundtrack if that's the case. You can just call me Chrysalis.
You need to go thefterize that thing.
And there's an Oberheim OBX8 there too. Just
Pshaw.
Let's just rescore the movie.
Mike brings up a great point. I wonder why they didn't ask Vangelis.
It might be that he's 130 years old, or he, or doesn't have a relationship with. But it wasn't the same director, was it?
No.
That's probably the real reason. I mean,
it's I heard he was working on Chariots of Fire too. Thank you, Dan.
Is that a real thing?
No, but I appreciate the laugh. Everybody else just ignores my hilarious jokes.
Well, you're in character, right?
That's right. I'm just in character. I win the award for being in character at all times, 365 days a year. Hey, Mike Hoffman says that Michael, sorry, I'm not sure if it's Mike or Michael, says, I've been using Ableton 9. I'd be interested to see what they would do in Ableton 10. I'll tell you what, man, I've got a list as long as my leg, and I'm a rather tall fella. God, they better bring some 5.1 or 7.1 mixing capabilities in there. I want stacked MIDI because I want to be able to select more than one MIDI instrument and see their MIDI all stacked on top of each other. Oh my gosh.
Speaking of MIDI,
excited.
Elias 3 came out and they're bringing MIDI back.
Oh man, Elias. You know, we got to get those guys on the show.
Yeah. I've worked on it in the Game Sound Con. I'll talk to the chaps there.
Please do. And at one time we were talking to him about being on the show, and I got to be honest, I think I don't mind saying this in public. I think I dropped the ball on that. I think I got distracted by life and didn't follow through. I need to send them in a hello, I love you, and get them on the show.
That's going to cost you a shave, mate.
Don't you shave me. Look at this beard. I've been growing this for 4 years. Look at this.
Keep dropping them balls. You get those shaves.
Well, I don't think
I grow this in 4 minutes.
Beard. I think he's aiming for.
Would you say,
else.
Mike?
I don't think he wants to shave your beard if he's staying in character. I think he's aiming for something a little lower than the beard level.
Hey, hands off.
No, not that low.
Oh, sorry. You got me worried.
You need to see Sweeney Todd. It'll make a lot more sense.
He's talking about meat pies.
Exactly right.
This is devolving. Hey, you know, I think we've been on here for an hour.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Did we live up to our obligation?
We contractually have satisfied the internet. Oh my God. Well, if we had said something worth a damn, maybe. But hey guys, thanks for watching thanks for being on the show, and I guess we should wrap up. Although I'm having a blast, so I don't really want to hang up. But the last one was like 1 hour and 20. Vince and all that talking. It wasn't really Vince, but I just had to say that because he's not here. So Dan, welcome to the show. Thanks, man.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
This is rad as hell. And great topics, everybody. Great costumes, Mike and Chase. And Chase stuck it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, he stuck with that accent the whole time. He was committed to that character.
Well, I am half British after all, so it's not that hard.
So you're just channeling your ancestry.
Nicely done. Nicely done. And I'm half gray, so I should be wearing that wig.
You can have it after this.
No, I don't need any more. So, oh, by the way, you like my curtains? Look, I hung curtains. Look.
Aren't you the decorative type?
There's like fancy curtains now.
Looks like mosquito netting from here.
Okay, I'm hanging up. Tweet the Twitters and face the books. Hey, there's a new one. Hold on. Do this one too. Sign up for this because you don't get enough junk mail already.
Is it Slack?
No. Yes.
Is it Discord?
Any of you with Orkut accounts, please include us.
I've been on here for like Slack for like a year. It's like, hey, there's this new thing, Slack. Hey, by the way, guys, help me out. What's going on with Stargate? I want to watch the latest Stargate episode, but I got to download an app, and I can't tell if the episode started. Have you guys figured that out? Anybody?
I saw that movie.
Stargate Origins, a new TV show. Stargate, the one where they were in a spaceship that just traveled forever, was really good. It was really, really good.
Stargate SG-1.
Not that.
Well.
That wasn't bad, but don't watch the one where they were like in... What's that underground city? What's that underwater city?
Atlantis.
Yeah, don't watch that one. That one's terrible.
The Game Boy game isn't that great either.
But the new Star Trek is fantastic, and I'm anxious to see the Stargate. I can't figure. I think I already took this new social media off my phone because I'm a good person. So don't do that one. And then we'll see you all later. Thanks, chatties. Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.
Bye.
See you.